Four beautiful, thriving university students. You had Madison Mogan, a 21-year-old, Kaylee Consalves, a 21-year-old, Zaina Kernoodle, 20, and her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, 20. They were best friends. You see photographs of the four of them together all the time. All four of them went to University of Idaho. That's a public university. It was established in 1889, seeped in tradition. It's really known for its beautiful campus and very strong academic programs. It is the number one best college in Idaho, and it's a very close-knit community. The city itself is a total of about 26,000 people. The university has upwards of 11,000 people. Really idyllic and safe, or so everyone felt that it was safe. The person accused of brutally murdering all four of these students in the middle of the night at their home when they were asleep in a safe community, stabbed to death, brutally stabbed to death multiple times. The person accused of killing them, another student, a local doctoral student in criminal justice, Bryan Kohberger. The sin? Lust. Lust. The definition of the English word lust in both Hebrew and Greek is to deeply desire something or someone that's not yours. And it can be sexual, but it can also be non-sexual. This is the why behind the crime, the motive. I'm Ashley Willcott. As a TV anchor, a former judge, a trial attorney, I can tell you that almost every single case I've seen intersects with one of the 7 deadly sins as motive. Pride, greed, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth, the opposite of the 7 heavenly virtues. Temptations that, taken too far, turn deadly. This week, we're going to break down the case of the accused Bryan Kohberger and discuss if this deadly sin of lust turned into a deliberate murderous rage. Joining me a little bit later is Dr. Debbie Goodman, an expert criminologist and a professor at St. Thomas University, in our breakdown segment where we go deep on the how and the why of the lustful desires of a young man brutally murdering 4 college students. At least that's what he's accused of. Let's get into it. This is the Deadly 7. At first, this case was an unsolved crime, no suspects. And law enforcement described this in one of many, many different press conferences as a complex case. It rocked the close-knit community to its soul. 26,000 people believing that they were safe. Unsolved murders. 7 weeks later, with the community on edge and all kinds of rumors about who could commit such violence, police finally announced an arrest. And one of the most important things in this case is the timeline that led to that arrest. The suspect, Bryan Kohberger, he's scheduled to go to trial on August 11th of this year, 2025. Here's what we know about the case based on the timeline. Again, 4 happy, thriving college students. On November 12th of 2022, starting at around 9 p.m., Kernoodle and Chapin are seen at a party at Chapin's fraternity, Sigma Chi. It's only a short walk from the apartment where they were all housemates, along with 2 other on King Road. So all 6 of them live at this place that's rented out to college students on a regular basis on King Road. So they walk to this fraternity party where he's a fraternity. Now, at the same time, one of the 4, Consalves, uploads pictures on her Instagram, and it's of the 4 of them together. And the caption is, "One lucky girl to be surrounded by these people every day." They know, based on the timeline of video cameras, of photos, of posts, that around 10 p.m., Consalves and Mogan, the 4th of the 4, go to a sports bar, the Corner Club, and this is in the town where they live. Fast forward, here's what they know next. Investigators piece it all together. At 1:30 a.m., so the next morning, November 13th of 2022, There's a nearby food truck surrounded by students, and you see Consalvis and Mogan ordering at that food truck. The two who were at the fraternity party are seen returning to the house. It's 3 levels, and it looks like any of the other homes rented to college students in this town at about 1:45 a.m. So Kernoodle and Chapin returned to the home at 1:45. 1:54, not even 10 minutes later, that's when they see Consalvis and Mogan, the two who were at the food truck, return to the home. So they now know all 4 by 1:56 in the morning have arrived home at their home where they all live. And remember, they have 2 other roommates who were not killed. Those 2 had also gone out that night, and they had arrived home first around 1 a.m. Later that morning, almost noon, almost lunchtime, it's 11:58 a.m. There's a 911 call made. It's made on the cell phone of one of the 2 surviving housemates. And they just request assistance for an unconscious person. And so at first, law enforcement thinks maybe they've been out drinking, maybe something happened to one of them, maybe they just can't wake them up, no big deal. Until they get to the house. And what do they find at the house? They find the 4 students stabbed to death, brutal bloodbaths of all 4 in their own rooms where they think they're safe, where they go home after a night with their friends. Those 4 have been killed. The preliminary autopsy reports show that they were attacked with a big knife and that they died sometime after 2 a.m., each of them from multiple stab wounds. Sometime after 2 a.m. Remember, they were all in that house at 1:56. So potentially within 5 minutes, the stabbings began. The autopsy describes their wounds as pretty extensive. Police say they were most likely asleep when they were slain, that some of them did have defensive wounds. None of them were sexually assaulted, thankfully. And they didn't have a place to start. They had no suspects. So here's what the police did first. They go to the dumpsters, 3 different dumpsters close by, and start digging through the contents to find any evidence, any clue as to what had happened. They started contacting local businesses to find out if any knives had been purchased because they know a knife caused the stab wounds. 2 weeks later, they're again speaking to the public because it's taken on a life of its own. And they reaffirm, they'd said it once before, they say it again, this quadruple homicide was part of a targeted attack. Everybody's talking about this. Everybody's saying it's not true. Maybe it's a serial killer. Maybe it wasn't a targeted attack. What has happened? Nobody knows. It was a friend. It was one of the housemates. They say, no, this was a targeted attack. They're consistent in our belief, this is their quote, that this was indeed a targeted attack, but have not concluded if the target was the resident or its occupants. So imagine, if you will, that one of your kids was inside this house and the police can't even tell you if the person was killing them because of where they lived or killing them because of who they were. The family's getting nothing. The family is speaking out publicly about a demand for justice. We need to know what happened. The community, this open, safe community, is now locking their doors, paranoid, terrified. Nobody knows who the killer is on the loose. The police have got to do something quickly. December 2nd of 2022, the 2 housemates that survived released letters talking about their struggle to accept why the lives of 4 beautiful people are taken so brutally. Everyone is demanding answers. The police ask the public for help. As a result, the FBI gets flooded with tips, 11,000 tips about what it could have been. And then get this, December 7th, which is what, 3 weeks later, if even that, police actually begin removing personal items belonging to each of the 4 victims to return those personal items to the family. Now, on one hand, anyone can certainly understand why it's important to return personal items to grieving family who has no idea what happened or why it happened to their children. On the other hand, keep in mind that's evidence. They're returning personal items without a suspect in the case. Now, at the same time, the police release this without details of why. The police say, "We are looking to speak with any occupants of a white Hyundai Elantra between 2011 2013 model with unknown license plates." And they don't say why. They don't say if it's connected to the killer. They just say that that person or people may have critical information to share. So this starts the rumor mill. Why? The Hyundai Elantra. Everybody who has that car is being stopped, is being questioned. The neighbors, the community, the students, the family, they're all looking for that car, but nobody really knows why. Police continue a month later to ask the family to be patient, that it's their investigation. They're investigating. 7 weeks later, December 30th, they announce an arrest. They arrested Bryan Christopher Kohberger, a 28-year-old, 7 years older than some of the victims that he allegedly killed, a resident of Pullman, Washington, but at the time, he too was a student, a doctoral student at Washington State University. However, he's arrested in Pennsylvania. He was arrested about 2,500 miles from the Idaho campus, charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and burglary. Here's what we know now. Fast forward. He hasn't yet gone to trial. He's presumed innocent. But the parents' home in Pennsylvania, they were able, law enforcement, to use DNA analysis to connect through the father's DNA, Bryan Kohberger, the suspect, to one drop of blood found in the home on King Street, where these 4 students were brutally murdered. That one drop of blood was on a knife sheath that was left behind, that was left at the scene of the murders. The knife was not found. The sheath with the blood was found inside that home. That's the DNA that was connected. Later, we learned there's a video of a traffic stop when the father is driving Bryan home. And that traffic stop looks a little suspicious. He acts a little suspicious. That's another small piece. Circumstantial evidence? We'll wait and see. He has denied the killings. His attorneys, after he's arrested, he is in jail. He is not out on bond. His attorneys actually released evidence through a motion of an alibi and an alibi defense. And in this motion, they said he was driving around that night. His cell phone does put him in the area, so they know he was in the area. But the alibi was he was driving around that night, and he likes to drive around. That's what he likes to do. One of the surviving roommates described seeing the attacker with a black mask on, and the individual has bushy eyebrows as described by the person who saw him in the home. Well, Bryan Kohberger has bushy eyebrows. This is what's unfolding as we're learning what to expect in his trial. He's only accused of this crime, but here's what we know. This suspect, what's the motive if he's found guilty? A lust. We know that from some tracking he was doing and some social media comments to one of the young victims. Stay tuned. We're going to do a deep dive with the evidence and a criminologist weighing in. Dr. Debbie Goodman will be joining. Joining me now is criminologist Dr. Debbie Goodman, also a professor. And Dr. Debbie, thank you so much. I've been wanting to have you on. You're an author, you're an expert. I could go on, but I just want to jump straight into Bryan Koberger, one of your ideas of let's cover this case. And I want to start with the motive and why possibly. Now, we know these are allegations. He's charged with the 4 counts of murder. He's facing the death penalty. And he's innocent until proven guilty. But why possibly could be the reason if he's convicted that he was motivated to do this?
Certainly. Good afternoon, Judge Ashley, and it's such an honor and privilege to join you. I'm a big fan, and thank you so much for the invitation to have this conversation. And yes, indeed, I think you're right on target that, in the terms of the deadly sins, lust would be certainly a place for us to start. And here's why. Because if we even look at some of his searches, Judge, we know that he searched terminology, semantics, such as pornography, drugged, sleeping, passed out. Now, we take a look at that as the platform and we're reminded of Ted Bundy. Why? Because Ted Bundy, as we know, before he was executed, and a journalist asked him, why did you do what you did? We have at least 35
Mm.
victims that we know. I actually think Ted Bundy participated in more. But how he answered Judge Ashley is he said that pornography, he felt, really just set a tone for his life in a very derogatory manner. And yes, he was obsessive compulsive. And yes, he felt that in seeing the imagery as well as the video, he had to act upon it. Now, in my opinion, as a criminologist, I think Bryan Kohberger also followed a very similar pathway. And we know in our field we have something called hybristophilia. And we'll just remind your viewers what that is. When individuals become fascinated with, intrigued by killers. So even among the mass and serial murderers, Judge Ashley, they too have those to whom they look for as idols and with admiration. So I think Bryan Kohberger wanted to be Ted Bundy 2.0, and pornography was something, and here's what we know in our field, that many of whom will view before their terrible actions and violations, and in this case, this savage slaughter, but they will also view it post-mortem. So, although we don't have evidence of that right now with our four victims, Maddie, Kaylee, Ethan, Zana, I do think, Judge, that he was on this trajectory of becoming a serial killer to the likes of a Bundy, a Dahmer, and a BTK.
Wow. There is a lot to unpack there. I want to start again with lust. I agree it is lust because at the very beginning of this, there was some indication, and we'll have to see what evidence comes in at trial, but some indication, Dr. Debbie, that he actually may have followed one of the girls on social media, perhaps even commenting, wanting to meet them or wanting to meet up. And how does that play into this idea of pornography, which can be of people that you've never met, don't know anything about, versus that individual connection to one of the victims.
Absolutely. And again, that's such an important inclusion to the conversation. Why? Because early on in our fact finding of this case, there was a solid, significant reporting that Bryan Kohberger on social media had reached out potentially to one or more of the four victims. Now, it was nothing necessarily inflammatory or derogatory, but it was along the lines of the "Hey, what's up?" Now, allegedly, there was no response, but as we know, no response is a response, right? Zero interest. Now, is it possible that that led to some type of obsessive compulsive thinking? I would say yes. Why? Because the obsessions, the compulsivity, hedonism, where people are deriving pleasure of hurting other people, the narcissism, the grandiosity, I think, again, Judge, with 28 years, he was 28 years old at the time, as we know, there was
Mm.
really rejection upon rejection of him, particularly by young ladies. We don't even know, Judge Ashley, did he have a female friend? Did he ever have
That's
any
true.
type of intimate relation? We don't think so. So my theory in accompanying the lust theory, I call it JAR, jealousy, anger, revenge. I think he was jealous of our victims. They were fun, they were friendly, they were outgoing, they were a part of things. Bryan Koberger, apart from things. I think that angered him. He really just didn't have a social network and ultimately took the revenge and killed them.
Jar. I love that. I'm going to use that moving forward because it's a great frame of reference to think about these things and the motive and why a 28-year-old would do this. I want to now go back to the part you said about you think it's a young Ted Bundy and a serial killer in the making. How do these things play into that? Number one, There are no accusations and or convictions or allegations of any crimes at all prior to this. He got stopped for running a stop sign about a month before the murders, but he doesn't have any other criminal history that we know of, number one. Number two, his age, 28 at the time of these murders, allegedly by him. And number three, the actual murder scene, breaking into their home where they're safe. It's a clean murder scene. What do I mean by that? The only evidence connecting him to the murder scene inside that home where they were all four brutally stabbed is a sheath with a blood drop that connects to his DNA. I mean, that to me is miraculous that if this is his first time, if convicted, killing anyone, that he killed four individuals without being caught 7 weeks before he was even arrested as a suspect in the violence of the crimes and the lack of physical evidence at the crime scene.
Right, 100% judge, but among these serial and mass murderers, there is always a tipping point and a
Mm.
starting point. And so, admittedly, he appeared on paper, let's say, to be going through a very rigorous academic program of already accomplishing a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, enrolled in a PhD program, which we know is really at the height of intellect. But here's the however. Although he may have aspired to be somebody in a contributory manner, I think it was all that was building up, Judge, that really again separated him. He really just was not well connected with the students. They complained about him, particularly the female students, and I think that angered him even more. So at some point he made a decision, I believe, where fantasy and fact would now collide and intersect. And if we just take a look at all of the search histories and the knife and the knife sheath and the knife sharpener and the balaclava, the face mask covering, and you're 100%, this little 1-inch knife sheath that has his DNA, Judge Ashley. There are 1.9 million people in Idaho, and we don't even have transfer DNA, and it's right there at the crime scene. So I think that's huge. And again, innocent until proven guilty, but there is so much content that really is, this red flag pointing his way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we know that some other items have been found. There was a search warrant executed on where he lived. There was a search warrant executed on his parents' home. And we know there were some gloves, some other items that were found. We know that he was researching about buying a knife on one of his devices prior to the murder. So there are other pieces of evidence that are coming out. And as we're talking about those other pieces of evidence, let's talk about the death penalty because the state asked for the death penalty, and guess what? The judge said, yes, you can seek the death penalty. The defense, though, said, no, 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 no. It's unconstitutional because of a diagnosis, autism. Talk about the autism piece and how that affects evidence coming in or how the defense might use it in your expertise.
Thank you, Judge. I actually have the opinion that I am not necessarily of the belief that this individual has autism. I actually think it is more a circumstance of psychopathy. I think he's a psychopath, Judge Ashley. Why? Because these individuals, they lack remorse, they lack the emotional intelligence and ability to interact. Again, the grandiosity, the narcissism, the hedonism. So I almost think that even though the defense has designed that perhaps as a mitigating circumstance about the death penalty, but I'm just not sure of its accuracy and validity as it relates to Bryan Kohberger.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see because if he is given the death penalty, if he is convicted of the crimes in the first place, there will absolutely be an appeal of that. I have no doubt, and we'll see what happens. There's always an appeal of the death penalty. You just said something interesting to me, and it was something else I was thinking about as I've been doing a deep dive on this case. Because again, I truly believe lust is what caused him, what motivated him in the first place. But you just mentioned a low emotional IQ, but we know he's smart. Talk to me about serial killers and psychopaths and the relationship, if any, between that and a low emotional IQ, but a high intellectual IQ.
Yes, that is an excellent point you raise, and it's pretty consistent, Judge Ashley. Again, whoever the names are, let's say, who would come to mind the Ted Bundy, the Jeffrey Dahmers, Dennis Rader. These are individuals who can seemingly do well, let's call it, in academia. Remember, Ted Bundy, he was interested in the law, studying law. But here's the disconnect. The disconnect is that we may see somebody tearful, crying, they're upset. 9 out of 10 people would stop and say, "Gee, may I help you? Are you okay?" However, the mass murderers, the serial murderers, they can bludgeon judge. If we look at BTK, 10 people, and what does he do? He goes back to work. A lot of these killings were during his lunch break. And you've got Jeffrey Dahmer, who was so prepared, and what he did, and meeting individuals in the bar and club settings and bringing them back to the home. And we know all of the graphic, gruesome detail there. 17 victims. And again, with Ted Bundy, we think, but again, my feeling is it's far higher than what the numbers indicate, 35 victims. But remember, it's in the 70s. We don't have necessarily the DNA and all the great technology we have today. So I think his victimization was higher. But it's very consistent, Judge, with how these people think. How do they think? It's all about me, myself, and I. They really think in the way of the intellect, that they're going to be the smartest one in the room. Law enforcement won't catch them. I really think that Bryan Kohberger felt he would get away with it. I believe he went to these great lengths, and even in this 6-week window until, local, state, and federal law enforcement caught him, I believe he was on the trajectory of being the serial killer, to again victimize and more victims. And I think then the lust and the sexual violence we would have seen.
Mm. So on March 19th of this year, 2025, there were some new court filings that gave us some additional little tidbits of what the evidence is and what they're trying to get into evidence. And number one is that Koberger purchased a knife that matches the type of the knife sheath that was found in the home. But number two is what I want you to focus on for me, Dr. Debbie, and that is that he allegedly took a selfie just hours after the killings. And as you were talking about the serial killer who would go back to work after the lunch break of killing people, it made me think of this, that he would even bother to take a selfie hours after he's brutally stabbed and killed 4 people allegedly.
Yes, Judge Ashley, I really think that that's a huge issue for many reasons. Why? Because again, most of these killers, back to the 3 we've been talking about, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, BTK, Bind, Torture, Kill, Dennis Rader, they do want some type of remembrance. And I'm almost like with chills as I'm about to say what I'm about to say. But again, before Ted Bundy's execution, and a journalist asked him, "Well, Ted, why did you take pictures at the crime scene?" Verbatim, Judge Ashley, "Oh, well, when you do something so well, you want to remember." Now we hit the pause on Bundy. Let's parlay over to Koberger. And we believe that he did not take the phone in with him during that 4 a.m. to potentially 4:17 a.m. But Judge Ashley, as we know, there's no coincidence when it comes to murder. This individual takes a selfie 6 hours after this savage slaughter. So I think it is very indicative, even if we remind how was that looking visually. He's in a bathroom. He's nicely dressed. There's almost like this smug and smirk on his face. He gives the thumbs up. I mean, it's so indicative to me as a criminologist that he was very pleased and there was pleasure about this accomplishment. And by the way, maybe somebody wants to say, "Oh, but that's what young people do between the ages of 20, 30. They're the population that takes selfies." Okay, that's a good argument too. But guess what? Bryan Koberger was not that type of guy. You look at his phone, there were very few selfies. He wasn't that guy. But the fact that 6 hours later he takes that selfie, I do think it's important.
And so proud of himself. There comes another 7 deadly sin. But to me, there's pride in saying, "Oh, look what I did successfully and well." And for 7 weeks, they hadn't arrested him. So I'm sure that adds to his conflated, "I did this so well, they don't even know it was me."
That's right.
So why these victims, especially when you think about the fact there's 6 people who live inside this home? 2 of the people came home at approximately 1 a.m. Then we know that 2 of the victims came home at 1:45-ish. I can't remember the exact minute. And then after that, 156. How why these victims when honestly, you don't know if the 2 that came home at 1 AM are awake, are armed, are going to, beat 'em up? Why these victims?
Right. Well, I think when it comes to the young lady victims, Judge Ashley, and we look at Zaina, and she was in the relationship with Ethan, and then, of course, Maddie and Kaylee, the composite of the four really just representing such talented young people. They had goals, they had aspirations, they had a wide social network. They were involved in intimate relations, and this is what he aspired to, especially if, and again, alleged, we have to say, there was some allegation of an obsessive compulsive, potentially stalking of one. Now, again, which one, we're not 100%, one potential name has been mentioned repeatedly, possibly Maddie. But nonetheless, Judge, when it's a mass murder, when it's a serial murder, the planning, the premeditation, and the preparation is so extensive that they are planning it. And yes, I believe he wasn't necessarily expecting, Bethany and Dylan to be there. The fact that they survived would also suggest to me that he really had this target audience of the four and not the other two.
Yeah. Of the 4, not the other 2, which is crazy when you think they all lived together, they were all friends, but it's those 4, to your point, that are in picture after picture after picture because they were so close. Here's what we know about next steps. Right now, jury selection is expected to begin on July 30th. There was a change of venue, so that's gonna be, miles away from where the crime occurred. The trial's opening statements are currently scheduled to begin on August 11th of this year, 2025. And then the judge had said generally it's going to be Monday through Friday, 8:45 to 3:30 p.m. The judge has not yet decided if jurors are going to be sequestered or not during the deliberations. And then, of course, if there's a conviction, there may be a penalty phase because the death penalty is going to be sought by the state. The court has given permission for that. Let me ask you, Dr. Debbie, I can't thank you enough. I love your expertise. I love being on with you. Your last thoughts about this particular case as we watch it continue to unfold.
Right. Well, as we watch, Judge, this becomes a historic case. Why? Because our four victims, could be anybody's children, neighbors, and it is just absolutely horrible and heinous that it happened. But yet, I think for whoever participated in this, and I do believe the right suspect has been identified, and I do believe it's a singular suspect. There's not a secondary partner or some type of alternate suspect to be looked at. But I think what America wants to know about this case, number one, is the why. Now, the question is, will we ever know the why? Sometimes one, meaning the killer, wants to divulge that only toward the end, let's say, of life. But I think your platform about the lust is definitely at the center of this. And then the why, of course, about why the victimization and why the selectivity of these particular victims, we'd want to know. But all of the purchases, Judge, and all of the searches, and we have the car on surveillance, and we have the phone pings. There's just so much there. And obviously, that one little knife sheath with the DNA of the suspect, it's small but mighty. But as a criminologist, I feel people lie, but evidence does not lie. DNA does not lie. And as we move closer, there is a sense of justice. We want to make sure that, as tragic as this is, and the loss of these young lives, but for the families, and I'm all about victimology, and for the families to feel that justice has been rendered for their loved ones, I think is very important.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I will say, I agree with you based on the evidence as we know it so far without having heard from the defense. I think the state has a very solid case that he did this and that he did this alone. I want to end with again remembering the victims in this case. Madison Mogan, a 21-year-old. Kaylee Consalvis, also 21. Zaina Kernodle, 20-year-old, and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin, 20, all best friends, all murdered at the hands of, will the jury determine, Bryan Kohberger. Dr. Debbie, thank you so much for joining me today. Always appreciate you.
Thank you, Judge. My pleasure.